الله بالخير. عقلانية التمرد وفلسفة التنظيم سياسة قديمة جديدة في مواجهة سلطة الرجل الأبيض المبنية على أساس الاستعمار واستغلال الموارد والعنف والعبودية. لا يزال صدى كلمات المفكر الثوري الأفريقي فرانس فانون في كتابه معذبو الأرض يؤثر في مفاهيم الحقوق المدنية ومناهضة الاستعمار وحركات الوعي لدى ذوي البشرة السوداء حول العالم. يرى العالم الشعوب الأفريقية من منظور الاستعمار. هل يغذي الإعلام الغربي العنصرية تجاههم؟ كيف يهمش الفكر الغربي المنحدرين من أصل أفريقي وينكر إسهاماتهم الإنسانية؟ من هم معذبو الأرض المستضعفون الذين يتجرؤون على المستكبرين؟ وهل تعزز تعددية الأقطاب حق تقرير المصير للمنحدرين من أصول أفريقية؟ نرحب بكم ونرى ونسمع أكثر من سيسيل جونسون المدافعة الأمريكية عن حقوق الإنسان من أصول جامايكية في البعد الأقرب هذه الميادين. وأنا زينب الصفار، خليكم ويانا. Cecile Johnson, human rights defender, co-facilitator of the African Descendant Nation USA, CEO and founder of the African Development Plan. Cecile Johnson, welcome to Al Mayadeen. This is the Proximate Aspect, and I'm Zainab Al-Safar. Such a pleasure to have you, ma'am.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Well, Frantz Fanon, political philosopher, believes that Europeans need to repay not aid, but reparations. He believes all the wealth of Europe is stolen from the third world. What counts today, the most important question, Cecile, is the need for a redistribution of wealth. Why are reparations so integral to the Black people?
Well, reparations are important because over the last 500 years, since the 1452 Papal Bull that launched this war against us, we have been the people whose resources were stolen, and that includes not only the people themselves, right, through enslavement, but also the resources of our land, the gold, uranium, all the other things that Africa has. So reparations is important because when you look at the 1960s and when African countries began to be decolonized, their future actually looks very good. Yet 60 years later, we are still having 40-something% of the world's poor. When you look at our infrastructure, basic things like electricity is not a constant in many of these places. And when you look at internet connection, which we need in order for our people to catch up with the technology, just so many different things. On the continent, maternal mortality, infant mortality, health outcomes. And then when you look at other places where we are in the Caribbean, in the United States where I'm at, we have some of those same issues.
So it's a scheme, so to say, perhaps against our peoples.
The developing world, yes, the so-called developing world. And in the case of, you call us a third world, I don't. I'm an African-centered scholar, and we go by who came here first, right? So African people are the cradle of civilization. So we call ourselves the first world. I think it's important that we understand how we see ourselves, because how we see ourselves is part of the problem, right? So reparations is important because there's a group of people, England, the Europeans, who came out and conquered the world through guns, germs, and steel. So they had superior firepower and superior technology, and they have raped and plundered the world. So yes, I see you have the same problems in the Arab world that we're having in the African world and many
True.
parts of Asia. You know, so yes,
Yes.
it's a global thing,
Sure,
right?
but by a kind of perverted logic, this colonialism, it turns to the past of the oppressed people and distorts, disfigures, and destroys it. And I'm quoting Fanon here. To
Yes.
this end, the white media reinforces the negative images, and the education given universally reinforces this low regard for people of African descent. It has become
Yes.
instinctual for most people to fear or to hate black people, unfortunately, as observers might note. Even black people hate themselves, as evidenced by the use of skin bleachers to look more white. Why, Cecile?
Yes. So I don't, obviously I don't have that problem. However, when you live in a society where the color of your skin gives you access to jobs and to positions and status, then subconsciously a child, right? A child will pick up that difference. So that's why you see the bleaching. The bleaching happens in India. You see it in Africa, and less so in the United States. I asked someone about that yesterday. It was, maybe years ago, but I don't really see that now as an issue for us. However, in other places in the Caribbean, this is what people are doing. So that's low self-esteem. When you do that two-doll test where you look at the black doll, you look at the white doll, and the black child, calls the black doll ugly and the white child beautiful, and who is good and who is bad. These are things that the child picked up from the society, right?
Exactly.
Whether it's the media or even their home, where sometimes the parents behave in this way because they too have been conditioned to feel inferior.
Right. Well, Africa has constantly been painted as a dying and diseased continent, while America, China, and Russia contend to secure Europe's rich mineral resources. And this is also according to our reference. How has Europe underdeveloped Africa, Cecile?
Well, Walter Rodney wrote a book about that, right? How Europe underdeveloped Africa. And you underdeveloped it first through robbing its people. It was not old people who were stolen, right? It was young people. And when you look at the technology, when Africans came to the Americas, they taught them how to grow rice. They taught them how to do many of the things they did when it came to agriculture. So we did not come as empty vessels. We were people who were involved in trade. We were building kingdoms. We were empires, and all of that. So it's a myth. People kind of think that you know that we were barren, right? In fact, they try to phrase it like they did us a favor by coming and colonizing us. Really, when you came to Africa at that time period, our kingdoms, our way of life were quite superior or equal and more than yours, right? So so that's part of the problem.
Right. Now, the black race, they're acknowledged as as you said, the cradle of civilization, is in a constant struggle with Western thought, which insists on marginalizing them through academia. What is it that facilitates this sort of mindset that has allowed this Eurocentric group of less than 10% of the world's population to dominate the world's thought till now?
Yes, yes. It is really kind of slick, right? So because we had libraries at Timbuktu, right? And we have hieroglyphics and on the pyramids, and we have other ancient forms of writing in Mesopotamia. So it's not like these people discovered writing, right? However, through colonialism, they were able to push their agenda. And so therefore, whichever colonizer was over you, then he pushed his agenda, his
True.
educational agenda. And many of our leaders, children in Africa, when they came in after 1885 with the Berlin Conference, so in the early 1900s, and they started to decapitate the leadership in Africa, they took some of their children and they took them and sent them to be westernized. So you take your people away from their culture. Many times when they went to these boarding type schools, you can't speak your language, you can't dress the way you normally do. And until you learn a few of their words, that's it. You can only communicate in their language. So this has been a deliberate, systemic, well thought out process that these people have instituted. right? So today you see the ramifications of that.
True. Now, poverty is a major issue for Black people and Native Americans. How is the Black awareness movement addressing the structural racism and devaluation of Black life in the USA today? And how were the African descendants exploited in the US, where underdevelopment is a public policy?
Yeah. So we've been resistant from we got here. And then there's also the fallacy of us getting here. Only 388,000. And I give maximum 500,000 Africans, enslaved Africans came through the Middle Passage.
Mhm.
African people were already here. In the 1300s, you had from the Mali Empire with the Abubakari expeditions and ships that were sent here, and people were already living in the Americas, right? When you look at archaeology, when you look at um, you know stuff coming out of South America, the Olmec Nation, and then you see that we were here. So that's the first myth. So we were here. So we've always resisted. Again, superior firepower, disease. When these people came, they wiped out a lot of our populations with diseases that we did not have. So
Mhm.
that was part of it. And then there's been this move to whiten the country, right? So you see from like 1820, from the 1700s, but really between 1820 and 1860, where the majority of those people who you see today, ancestors came. And when they came, they were given so much privilege, right? They were given land, they were given access to being citizens and power,
Mhm.
and how they have then taken it. So you've had resistance, you've had slave rebellions, you've had people who have resisted through the years. It's just that you don't hear about that. You don't hear about it because that's not the history that the colonizer wants you to know. When you're teaching your people who you've subjugated, you don't want them to know that you've had people who were bold and resisted, right? You
Mhm.
want them to think that every act that they
Mhm.
have done against you is what you have had to
And
endure.
also trying to undermine their values, because the settler only ends his work of breaking in the native when the latter admits loud and clear the supremacy of the white man's values. Cecile, I would like to hear more on this particular subject. How can you explain the Black race constant struggle with Western thought?
Well, I truly believe that that is ingrained through the educational system,
Mhm.
right? So the Americanization process. There was a book I read called America, where this gentleman, Alistair McCook, I think his name is, he remembers when the Americans came to England during World War II, how they were not able to tell the soldiers who was of what class, right? Because of the way they spoke, and the way they ate, and even the way they dressed. And for the British, that was kind of interesting because, of course, you can tell who's of what class by the way they speak and the education that they receive. So this Americanization process is pretty critical. And in that process, it's inherently racist. So the history that you're taught about these founding fathers, the majority of them were slaveholders, right?
Mhm.
And all of these values that they that they espoused didn't apply to anybody else, didn't apply to women, didn't apply to enslaved people, right? And anybody else of any other race. It was really white landed gentry, right? These values that they had. So America was built on a lie,
Mhm.
um, right? So that's basically what I would say.
Right. And now, in light of differences between present wealth and power and present poverty and weakness, correlation with past events, above all with past events of humiliation, injury, and insult, how do the white media and education, and here you talked about the issue of education, but I want you to
Mhm.
underscore it more. How do these reinforce the negative images and portrayal of the people of Afro descent?
Well, most of the times the news each night, right? Nightly
Mm,
news, it's
mhm,
always something negative, right? That's when you see us. The thing that's very hurtful for me, when I saw that movie, Hidden Figures, I
mhm,
was like, wow. So this lady helped them to get to the moon. And I'm just learning about it. I learned about John Glenn. All he
mhm,
did was take a ride, right? This lady actually did the calculations to get them there to the moon. And yet we never knew that. We never knew that these African American women had been part of the team that got them to the moon. Why did I learn that 60 years later? Right? And there's so many other things that are just basic needs, from a light bulb to refrigeration and all of these things that Black people actually were the creators of. So
true.
so they have like stripped us out of history, claimed everything for themselves. And it's really a mental issue that you have to strip everybody else of what they are in order for yourself to feel good, right?
Right.
So that's the cognitive dissonance of this group that we're talking about. So, many times we focus on us, but a little focus should also be on them as to why are you this way? What is it that you're lacking? Why you are constantly treating others in this despicable manner?
Right. Now, multipolarity uh, is built on the recognition of the equal rights of all people and cultures to go their own way, to build their own socio-political, economic, and cultural systems. You, Cecile, call this self-determination. So why
Yeah.
has the African, the black man, the black women in the world not been allowed to experience this these least at least these last 500 years this thing, and how to resolve such a challenge?
So the reason we have not experienced this self determination again is because I just see a lot of Trojan horses here, right? You have self determination has you have a right to declare, to be political, your social, your education. You have a right to all of these things, right? But when we became independent, and I'm not talking about us in the United States because we are still a colonized people, right? And the world has refuses to acknowledge it because of the way the United States controls the UN and other places. When it comes to Africa, you see, when you had Patrice Lumumba, in 6 months he was dead. In Nkrumah, he was deposed, right? You look at leadership that's there, Burkina Faso, right? And what happened to them, even though they had mastered feeding themselves in 3 years. So what happens is that when you have leadership that is actually effective, that is motivating the people, the United States assassinates you, or in the case of what's happening to us here in the United States, we had COINTELPRO, where they infiltrated the movement. They threw drugs into our community, had the crack epidemic. You had the destabilization. You had the mass incarceration of our people, right? You have Panthers who have spent 40 years in jail. I mean, how cool can that be? That's torture, right?
What is a way out of this kind of dilemma that the Afro descendants are going through on daily basis?
Well, for me, it's a waking up and understanding the concept of self-determination, right? Under international law, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 1, which was ratified by the United States in 1992, says all people have a right to self-determination, right? Most people don't understand that concept. So one, education. Education is critical. The education that we have needs to include these concepts, and we need to be more of a factor. We used to be 35% of the teachers in schools that were for us. Now we're down to 7%. So we're not getting an education that's actually educating us about our history, about our culture, right? We're being assimilated more and more. So you ask, what are solutions? That's a solution, right? A solution is education, because education has always been a thing that lifted people up out of poverty,
True.
right? That reinforced who they are. When you don't know who you are, then you'll fall for anything that somebody gives you. And when you look at what's happening to us in America and globally, that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is the inherited structures that we then thought were ours. You become independent, you get a constitution written somewhere else, sent to you, and you have all these systems that were in for colonialism, and then you now just change the name and call them your own. That's not freedom, right? So we
Right.
have to begin to look at what was our inheritance, what was the structure 60 years later, why are we still in the same position, if not worse, and look to other countries that have actually uplifted themselves. Look at China, right? Shut its borders, refigure itself, and now it's a superpower in 60 years, right? China was not as strong as Africa 60 years ago, right? And then many people who are African descent, because of our different languages that we speak now, and then the different brainwashing that we've received from the different colonizers, right? So we're not as unified as we'd like. So unity is very important. And
In
how
this,
do we get
in
that?
this sense, allow me to ask you here, knowing that the African descendants in America are almost 43 million people, what can a multipolar world offer African descendants in the US of A, in your perspective, Cecile?
We need assistance with getting our message out, the marketing of the concept of a self-determination, and the need for a plebiscite vote, and that we do have a new juridical identity that came into being in 2001, that of the Afro descendant, right? That of the Afro descendant as a legal juridical identity. And what that means, there have been cases of the Afro descendants in South America, the Saramecos versus Suriname, and then there's the cases of the Garifuna, right?
Mhm.
And the Afro descendant people status is almost equivalent, just a little bit lower than indigenous status.
Mhm.
Then the
Mhm.
next thing is the recognition that a lot of Afro descendants in the United States are actually indigenous people. So you got to
True.
change your concept of what you think indigenous looks like. It looked like all of us, from the very black, the curly hair, to very black, to straight hair, to many shades of brown, the copper
Mhm.
colored people written about in the books. So what the world can do is to help us, right? Help us to be acknowledged of who we are, right? We were not only just people who came through enslavement to the Americas. We are the original people of the Americas also. So that acknowledgement and helping to fund an African-centered curriculum. Everywhere that people live, shouldn't you learn about yourself in a positive way,
True.
right? And then in the context of world history. So helping to create that African-centered curriculum, fund something like that. And
Mhm.
then leadership development that's needed, right? Because many of our leaders have been co-opted. Like I said, if you show any stance of being strong about yourself, about your people, somehow you end up dead, as we can see
Mhm.
with Malcolm and Martin and all of
Exactly.
those assassinations, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
this is what the US does. This is what France does. This is what Europeans do. They
Mhm.
murder you, right? So the world, you're asking, what can you do? Let us start holding these people accountable for what they have done. Let us start holding them accountable, just like how they love to
Yes.
sanction everybody,
In,
right?
in this sense, ma'am, a long history of ethnocide, genocide, structural racism, poverty, and underdevelopment. How can Afro Americans move forward without addressing the structural racism and the devaluation of Black life?
We cannot move forward without evaluating that, right?
Mhm.
And acknowledging that. And now you have this backlash in the school systems in some of the, the Republican led states where people are talking about, changing what is it, against critical race theory. Really, it's not really critical race theory. It's about history. The problem with what the challenges that we have is that every time you think you've accomplished something, these people find a way to take us back, right? And we can't afford that anymore. We can't afford to be going back. So we
Sure.
have to unite. We have to fight. It would be helpful, just like how we as Americans or Black Americans have helped in the struggle for Africa, South Africa, and other places, in the 70s and 80s. We need
Mm.
that same effort on behalf of, on the part of the world, right?
Excellent.
And that's happening.
True.
That's happening through the permanent forum that's going to be happening. The second permanent forum of people of African descent is meeting May 30th to June 2nd in New York, right? They
Mhm.
met in Geneva, Switzerland last December. And so we are coming to the end of the decade of people of African descent. And as you can see, very little has happened for people during that decade. We
Mhm.
need the world to stop playing around and be serious.
In what way can the once colonized women or men become figures of instruction for our global century, Cecile?
In what ways? I think by one, understanding your identity, being proud of who you are. And that doesn't mean my love of myself doesn't mean I hate someone else. So that's the
True,
first
true,
recognizing that, right?
excellent.
Yeah. So people need to realize that. I come from a very diverse family, and I believe in a diversity of the world. This is what God has created. So
Sure.
we should celebrate that. So I think that that strength that we get from that unity, it's like a salad, right? So I'm an apple, you're an orange, and others are grapes and melons. And by the time we cut them up and put them in a fruit salad, it's all good. So I don't have
Mhm.
a problem with a world like that, but I have a problem where when the world does not want to acknowledge who I am and what I bring to the table and insist on devaluing me.
We
So
all
I
have a
wish
problem with that. That's a
yeah,
very, yes, important thing also to say. Yes, definitely, we cannot move forward without acknowledging how the world sees African people. Cecile Johnson, human rights defender, thank you very much for this enlightening perspective. Pure pleasure to have you always, ma'am.
same here. Thank you so much for having me.
Always a pleasure. إذا يرفض فرانس فانون ما يطلق عليه بالنزعة الإنسانية المعلنة في أوروبا، فإن النزعة الإنسانية الأوروبية تلك التي تقوم على أساس الاستعمار والاستغلال والعبودية والعنف هي نفسها تنزع الإنسانية. لعل في الصفحات الأولى من كتاب معذبو الأرض يتحدث فانون عن تلك الكائنات غير الإنسانية التي أصبحت أبطال التاريخ من خلال النضال. هذه محض بداية، إذ لا ينتهي عمل إطفاء الطابع الإنساني على العالم عند هذا الحد. في الواقع بنهاية الكتاب من الواضح أنه بينما يظل هذا العمل نقطة تحول حاسمة، لأن الوعي فضلا عن الواقع المادي لا يتغير بين عشية وضحاها. يجب أن يستمر التحرر العقلي والجسدي بعد طرد المستعمرين، ويجب تطوير المجتمع الجديد، الشخص الجديد المحرر جماعيا واجتماعيا وفرديا بوعي وعمدا. لذا عوضا عن تقليد الغرب والهوس بالرغبة في اللحاق به، ألا يجب الانعتاق من قيود الجلاد نفسه؟ وكيف لا يفهم العالم أن لدى القارة الأفريقية الطاقات والموارد والحضارة لتحقيق ذلك؟ من كل الميادين سلاما وتحية، في أمان الله.